Winton is a dreamer and a drifter. He dreams up stories, and he's one of this country's most promising young writers. Not that he's got author written all over him. He's your shorts and thongs type of man.
I think our accent is gorgeous, and I think that our colloquial words are poetic.
Do you like those words, just as with undies and shorts
I'm
and
mad about
dunnies?
them, love them, you know. I'm proud of them. I think they're terrific that we made up poetic words like that, you know.
Poetic?
I think...
Dunnies?
It's got a musical sound to me. Someone else the other day...
The last time I came to Western Australia to interview Tim Winton was 22 years ago in a small fishing village just a few hours up the coast from Fremantle, where he lived with his wife and 3 young kids. His reputation was already strong. He'd been writing since he was a teenager. He'd won major prizes. But it was his new book, just published, we'd come to talk about. It was called Cloud Street. Tim, thank you very much for joining us.
No worries, Jen.
How did that book change your life?
Well, I guess looking back, it was my 10th book, so I was an overnight success after 10 books. It changed my life in the sense that it kept the wolf from the door for the first time after a decade of writing professionally and trying to feed a family and keep things together.
In fact, I think you just before Cloud Street bought your first house, didn't you?
Yeah, I'd just come back from Europe and we'd been there about a year, and we bought an asbestos fish deco shack up the coast, which was all we could afford, and the only reason the bank would let us buy it was because I'd saved up 55% of the house's worth as a deposit, and I just thought there's no way on earth I can pay this mortgage off. And of course, I think within 8 months the interest rates went up to 17%, so I was just sweating bullets. And then Cloud Street came out. You know, all my novels to that point had come out as hardcovers, but the recession hit and the McPhee Gribble, the publishing house, was slowly going broke, and they had to publish Cloud Street as a paperback in a princely 4,000 first edition. And now and again, you know, I would sort of sit around in the evening and think, wouldn't it be nice if we could sell 4,000 or maybe if we dreamed large, wouldn't it be nice if it sold 10,000? And, you know, there was no particular reason why it should suddenly have begun to sell, but it did. And so then, you know, the second edition, you know, they pushed the boat out and published another 2,000, and then the week after that, another 2,000, and then suddenly it became sort of almost like a weekly printing. And so it did change our lives in the sense that for the first time in my whole career, after the first year, you know, we were getting the kind of royalties where, you know, I wasn't having to lie awake at night thinking that the house was going to get taken off us.
The downside of keeping the wolf from the door, I mean, well and truly, in fact, the wolf is not in your life now, is that there's so much more expectation. Do you miss the sweetness of no one kind of really asking too much of you and being pleasantly surprised?
Yeah, I think by the time Cloud Street had come out, I'd already lost any real sense of unself-consciousness. That was the great gift of being unknown and unaccountable, and well, no account, if you like. But yeah, I mean, it is harder all the time. Partly because writing gets harder. I just have to pull stuff out of the air, day after day, year after year. And when you're younger, you don't think about that. It's just so exciting. And then you realise you get into middle age and think, hang on, I'm having to make everything up as I go along. And there's no knowing that there's going to be anything in the air to pull out. For some reason, I had this notion that, like in another profession where you get enough skill up, and that sort of, you know, it's sort of ballast that that's going to put you in a good place next time around. But every book is a different problem. Every book is a new set of problems, and you have to learn to write all over again each time. Port of Fremantle, gateway to the booming state of Western Australia.
which was, you could say, like Texas, only it was big, not to mention thin-skinned and rich beyond dreaming. The greatest ore deposit in the world, the nation's quarry, China's swaggering enabler, a Philistine giant eager to pass off its good fortune as virtue, quick to explain its shortcomings as East Coast conspiracies, always at the point of seceding from the Federation. It was Leviathan with an irritable bowel.
Airy is new. Give a brief rundown.
Airy, I guess, is a story about a guy who's a sort of high-powered spokesperson for an environmental NGO. So he's been a kind of public face of the green movement, and he's lost his job, his marriage is tanked, he's really
hollowed out,
depressed, and he's not in good shape, and he's holed up in a top floor of a kind of a gloomy, gritty, seedy high-rise in Fremantle. And he's kind of in retreat from his whole life. He's disenchanted, he's fallen out of love, I suppose, with his life and life in general. And he's lost faith, I suppose.
And in this Airy, he meets a 6-year-old boy who's an ex-neighbour, lives next door, called Gemma. And Kai is a most peculiar and unusual boy. His first words in the book, "I'm not right in myself." Tell us about Kai.
Yeah, he's an odd little kid. He's, the little boy's come from a horribly dysfunctional background. His mum's in jail. His grandmother is raising him, and of course they're on a 10th floor, in a building with open walkways and railings, and he's just constantly obsessed that this little boy's going to fall or jump or something terrible is going to happen to him. And
he basically takes him on, and there's a lovely bit where he talks about lying in the flat night after night. He imagines Kai waiting for someone to keep him safe.
Keely, the man, has been in this business of saving ecosystems and saving the world, if you like, from itself. And he's no longer in that game. He's no good for anything. He's not going to redeem anything, or he can't defend anything. And that old impulse sort of kicks in that he might be able to save this boy.
Silent and backlit, the boy stood in the doorway. He was no more substantial than a blur. The minute he ghosted into the frame, filling the space with his peculiar static energy, something about this lack of resolution caused Keely's hackles to rise, as if some unknowable danger hung in the supercharged air about the boy.
It feels like a very different book from much of the rest of your work. It's very urban to begin with. These are all people, Keely and Kai and Kai's mother Gemma particularly, who are sort of in some sense alienated, estranged from the natural world. They're in this place of danger and exposure and surrounded by dark forces. Does it feel different to you, or in your own Tim Winton author, it's your creation thing, it fits in with the rest?
No, it fits, I think, with the rest of my work. It seems of a piece because you think Cloud Street is, probably my best known book. It's an urban book. Most of my stories are suburban stories, and the kind of the world that these people are from is very much in train with the stuff that I've written about before. I guess the location in a vertical building is probably the only difference. And people do get sucker from the natural world. There are moments when Keely, just at his lowest, he goes for a walk on the wharf, and somehow a little bit of the natural world and some gentleness in people is enough to keep him right from the edge of total despair. And I don't think it's that different. And again, there's anxieties about children and parenthood. It's pretty much the same old crap, isn't it?
The same old crap. No, I thought it was a different kind of crap, Tim. I have to say, I wondered actually how much, particularly Keely's rants when he goes on about the environmental activists, how much was an expression of your own disappointments and having been involved in that world yourself?
Not that much, I suppose. I mean, I had been active in the environmental movement for 10 or 15 years, and I'd seen a lot of things that I wasn't aware of otherwise, and I'd learned a lot about politics that I didn't previously know.
And I don't think you're saying that in a good way.
Oh, good and bad. I did learn a lot about civics in terms of what people could do when they got organised and when they were given good, clean information, and you could empower people, and been a part of some lovely things in terms of bringing about change and changing legislation and saving places.
I do remember you saying that it took 2 years after the Ningaloo Reef campaign when you didn't get the horrors looking at a bumper sticker though.
Yeah, and so it's not as if all these things come without consequence and without some low-level trauma sort of building up, and it's hard to be in a culture like ours, which is in a hurry and endlessly consuming and a bit unreflective. It's hard not to occasionally get a little exasperated or perhaps even a little gloomy. So I know a lot of people like Keely who are working in this kind of fetid space, trying to do what they can while they can, and you do see the damage and the burnouts and the wear. And the hypocrisies and so there's lots of highs and lows.
What people sacrifice
to
fight for what they think is good.
Yeah, and particularly in a state like Western Australia, which is only essentially a kind of an exaggeration of the nation as a whole, but a place where the economy is state religion, and there's a kind of feverish aspect to it, and there's a sort of pell-mell quality to it. It's a strange moment in history,
Well, Perth does get a particularly tough rap from you, I have to say. A pastel toy town which has bulldozed its past and buried its doubts. You sound angry about it.
No, I think that's a dispassionate view of the city that made me, and I think it's probably, you could say that about the country. I think this is still a country that's anxious to bulldoze its doubts and bury its past, in bluster. You can just keep playing Men at Work over the old. Well, you're not allowed to play it anymore because it's got Kookaburra sits in the old Gumtree.
Oh, well, as long as you pay the royalties to another corporation, you can.
Because I do not hope to turn again. I left them twisting, turning below. Desiring this man's gift and that man's scope, I no longer strive towards such things, because I know that time is always time, and place is always and only place. Because these wings are no longer wings to fly, but merely fans to beat the air. Although I do not hope to turn again. Although I do not hope. Although I do not hope to turn.
With The Turning, you kind of gave over the book. You didn't write the script, as I understand it.
No. It was an incredibly ambitious, almost kooky project that, Robert Connolly had embarked on. So when he asked, we're thinking about making this film, and it's 17 different films, 17 different directors, 17 different writers. What do you reckon? I just sort of scratched my head and thought, well, that sounds crazy enough.
The thing with seeing it up on screen is, in lots of ways, you get to see more than, if people haven't read the whole book, more than how it all fits together, how the characters all belong together, that in fact, though it's short stories, it is one whole. Yeah,
although it's quite interesting because, each story, there are lots of characters who reappear, but they're never the same, almost never the same actor. In fact, sometimes they're Indigenous and sometimes they're non-Indigenous. So that can be, confusing in a lovely sort of way because it throws it back, puts it back on its head all the time. So you do get this sort of discordant harmony, if you know what I mean, and you get the sense of the milieu. And with film, you get things that you can't get in the book. It can't deliver certain things that the book can give. So each has its own economy, and that's that's fascinating to see. And I guess it's fair to say that watching all 17 films, almost every one of them, there'd be, if I'd written it or I'd directed it, I'd probably think, oh, I would have done that differently, or I might have. But who cares? I mean, I'm quite relaxed about the fact that, as any reader will, they'll interact with this work in their own way, and they'll adapt it according to their own lights. And I'm not too worried about that. And I'm
So
just
there were
glad that they
surprises.
bothered.
There
Of
were
course,
surprises up there for you.
Constant surprises. I mean, nothing was as I expected it to be, and that's great. And so, you know, people can go and see this 3-hour film, which is 17 films with an interval, some of which is animation, some of which is dance, some of which, you know, are films with split screens, films with no dialogue, quite, you know, traditional realistic films as well. And it's kind of as I said, like a showcase of talent that, yeah, just made me, aside from the subject matter and whatever else, just made me feel good and hopeful, you know.
Faith and wonder and a sense of the spiritual dimensions of life. It's a deeply spiritual continent with a deeply irreligious culture on the top of it.
There's a little coastal memoir you've written, which is beautiful, and it's appeared with some great images on it. But you said you wrote that book, that one of the great experiences was taking your children to the ocean and introducing them to the sea. And you've recently, I believe, done the same thing with your grandchild.
Yeah, it was a couple of summers ago, I suppose, you know, when I just had the opportunity to, you know, take the granddaughter to the beach
What happened?
for her first swim. Oh, it was just
Describe.
it was just a lovely. It just reminded me of taking my first kid to the beach. Well, it was just that thing where this little girl had, you know, lived in an apartment and grown up in a city, and she hadn't had access to the natural world in the same way that I did as a kid and that my kids did. In fact, a few weeks ago, we took her up the coast and she saw her first campfire. She said, "What's it for?" There's steam coming off it. I said, "No, that's smoke," but close. No, just when she was really small, it's still a sort of babe in arms, just to take her down the beach and expose her translucent skin to the, you know, to the merciless
And did she
western
scream,
sun.
or...?
No, she was. The eyes were out on stalks, and it was just to blow her into the water in this strange shiver of kind of almost like recognition, because you know they're swimmers for 9 months before they get to be terrestrial beings, and it was. I just remember the light going across her skin and the water, and just hanging on like a little monkey, and then slowly relaxing and in some kind of recognition. Oh yeah, I remember this.
Do you, when you think of the prospect of losing that, or, I mean, in this book area, it's, as I said, you're very tough on the developers, on the greenies, on a lot of that side of life, where people who've turned their backs on the natural world and in fact are damaging the natural world. But you talk about it with real dispassion. Do you ever get just plain old angry?
Oh, you know, only several times a day. But, you know, Western people get this sort of abstracted, you know, view of life, that it's either just you know, living in your head and living in the economy and living in the future, but not living in the moment and not living in the world. And there's something that's missed, I think. It's something that's lost to you as a human when you're taken out of the world. You are a creature, and the longer we pretend that we're not creatures, the more damage I think we do to ourselves.
Do you look at the future with an optimistic or pessimistic cast?
I don't feel optimistic in an emotional sense, but I have to adopt optimism as a discipline.
Why do you have to?
What else are you going to tell the kids? You know, if we're in a bombed out house surrounded by, you know, some overwhelming force, of course you're going to tell the kids it's going to be all right. It would be sinful to tell them that it, you know, that it's not all right.
Well, because it's your job to keep them safe.
Yeah.
Timmy's going to work now. See, Timmy, kiss goodbye.
Do you still go to that really fantastic little Fibro beach house, which is where I first met you, where your kids grew up? Do you still go there?
Yeah, I work there. I live there most of the time now. I mean, over time, I've managed to be able to hang on to the old place and then go back to it and live at least half my life there, and I'm probably there 5 days a week.
Have you zhuzhed it up, or is it the same place?
No, it's the same carpet. Even all my tradie mates who come around, they look at the carpet and they look at me and, you know, just shake their heads, you know.
What you've done, virtually nothing.
I've done...
Still got the old fridge?
Done literally nothing. No, it's and that's, you know, I'd like to keep that. That's who I am, you know, and that's perhaps it's just a sentimental thing, but I'm very comfortable in that place, in that landscape. The house was very good to us, you know. We had all the babies there, and I wrote, you know, a lot of books there, and I could still hear the wind in the trees and the birds, and I can still shove my dinghy, you know, off the beach every morning and catch a feed of crays. So no, it's lovely being back there, and but then, you know, I have the kind of mobility of, now that I'm no longer in the class of my origin, where I can come and go. So I'm not trapped.
Well, it's that you can't even bear to call yourself middle class. Is it really?
No, of course I'm a bourgeois. I'm not just middle class. You know, I'm now of the class that puzzled and frightened me as a boy. You know, I never knew people who could choose to go roughly where they wanted to go and live roughly where they wanted to live, and who, you know, the life I came from was very defined. Your destiny was, you know, it seemed to be, you know, written before you'd arrived. So there's that kind of delusional idea that you're still, you know, belong where you came from. And I think the longer you are kind of immersed in privilege, the more blind you are to it. You know, just ask any white male.
Well, I'll ask you, Tim Winton, white male. Do you feel guilty about it? Do you feel?
No, I'm not guilty, but I am occasionally shocked by how oblivious I can be to my own privilege and to other people's lack of it. I'm not guilty for any. I didn't do anybody over in order to make good, so to speak. I just stumbled through the door into a different studio, I suppose, and you just keep tap dancing until you figure out the lines from watching everybody else.
Yet the conventional wisdom is that we don't have class in Australia. Brits did class, we don't do class.
It's interesting. I was talking to a journalist a few days ago in relation to my recent play, and I was just talking about the way it sort of tangentially deals with class. A young woman from the country who's working at the IGA and works as a cellar hand, and she's having a conversation with her old boss, who was a vigneron and a property developer. And again, this mutual bewilderment. But the journalist seems sort of shocked that I'd mentioned the word class. It's almost like I'd done a wee in the pool. It was, you know, we'd somehow moved on from that. It was the orthodoxy was now so fixed. There's a kind of a conservative political correctness that you're not allowed to talk about class.
They were nice folks, but just a teeny bit vain. There's his mum and dad eating breakfast under the table, because they're... You ever tried to sit on a chair without a bum?
Is it true that you knew when you were 10 that you wanted to be a writer? Is that true? And
yeah,
if
I'm
so,
pretty sure. I mean, maybe it's just something I've told myself, but no, I think I made declarations in primary school. I think I got asked in class by a teacher, you know, what are you going to do We must have been going around the classroom, asked what our plans were. I don't know why you ask a 10 or 11-year-old this in primary school, but yeah, I'd sort of declared myself that I was going to be a part-time poet and a policeman, I think. And I sort of, obviously, I modified my plans a little bit.
Did you have any kind of plan B?
Never. And that's what probably frightens me in retrospect, that I, you know, particularly once my kids got to be teenagers and then young adults, I think, what the hell was I thinking? And how did my parents cope with sort of the perilous contingency that, you know, we didn't know any writers. My parents, you know, didn't get to finish high school, or and they just were, you know, thrilled that I finished high school, and then it was the first in the family to go to university, and they thought that I'd get something safe and respectable, you know, that I'd get a job like a teacher or a lawyer, or so. Yeah, in retrospect, I look back and think that was a crazy, deluded. Only a youth who had no idea could have pressed on regardless.
But isn't that one of the joys of being a youth?
I envy that youth. You know, you're just ploughing on. You're just not listening to anything that anyone says. All the conventional wisdom I rejected, and I'm so glad, because all the conventional wisdom, if you listen to it, is crippling.
It's been a long time since we last spoke, but such a pleasure. Thank you so much for making time. Thanks for being with us, Tim Winton.
No worries, Jen.
I know it sounds really long, but you'll be amazed.
No,
how
it should be
quickly
fine.
it goes.
How do we pronounce it? I keep
Well,
calling it Erie, but like, you know, the Edward John Erie, the Erie Highway, the Lake Erie.
I looked it up, and they said Erie, but I think it can be any. Well, as long as we do the same. What are you guys using?
We said Erie.
Okay, well then we'll use Erie. I think we'll use this. It's better to sound the same way.
60% of people still come up and say, mate, I love that book, Breathe. It was a beauty, you know.
Did they say
lovely.
how they were affected? I mean, like,
Yeah,
just,
I mean, you know, you don't get that much time when you're talking over, you know, half a kilo of chops.
Hang on,
The male readers
Don't
as well
talk
as
to me
female
now.
readers.
Don't talk to me now.
We're recording.
Oh, good. Okay, all right. So
Yeah, you blew that, didn't you?
Oh, I didn't know that.